The air in the courtroom thickened, heavy with unspoken accusations and the sterile smell of old paper. He sat across the aisle, leaning back in his chair, a smug, almost pitying look on his face. His lawyer, sharp and predatory, was laying out their case, referencing Exhibit A, the contract he'd made me sign. I held my breath, my own lawyer beside me, quiet, a controlled stillness about him. The moment was here. Years of work, a lifetime of trust, crumbling to this single point. My stomach twisted, a cold knot tightening with every word his lawyer spoke, every confident assertion built on a lie. They presented the signed pages, the complex clauses, the carefully worded surrender of everything that was mine. His eyes flicked to mine, a fleeting look of triumph. He thought he had won. He thought I was cornered, defeated. And then my lawyer stood. He didn't speak immediately. He just walked towards the judge's bench, not with Exhibit A, but with a different file, bound in worn leather. He placed it before the judge. The silence in the room deepened. My husband shifted, his smirk faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What was this? This wasn't part of his script. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We build it piece by painstaking piece. It started in a garage. Cliché, I know, but true. Late nights fueled by cheap coffee and the fierce belief that we were on the edge of something. John had the vision, the grand ideas that sparkled like distant stars. I had the scaffolding, the engineering mind that figured out how to build the rocket to get us there. We were a perfect, frustrating, unstoppable team. Our arguments were legendary, loud and passionate debates about code architecture or marketing strategy, but they always ended with a shared bottle of wine and a renewed sense of purpose. We were partners in every sense of the word, lovers, friends, co-conspirators against a world that told us our idea was impossible. Early on, when the company was just a name and a shaky prototype, our first real investor, a gruff old man named Arthur who saw something of his younger self in our fire, insisted on a formal co-founders agreement. He called it the bedrock. He said emotions fade, relationships change, but paper, properly drawn and signed, endures. We worked with his lawyer, a meticulous woman who explained every clause. It outlined our equal ownership, our respective roles, the terms of dissolution, everything. It was long, dry, filled with jargon, but signing it felt right. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a covenant, a promise etched in ink that no matter what happened, we were in this together, equally. We signed it over pizza, shaking hands like serious business people, then laughing because it felt so absurdly formal for two kids in a messy garage. That document, the original, real contract, was tucked away in a safe, forgotten in the exhilaration of hypergrowth. The company exploded. Years blurred into a relentless cycle of launches, funding rounds, hiring sprees, and sleepless nights. We moved from the garage to a small office, then a bigger one, then our own building, a sleek monument of glass and steel. Our names were on the door. John became the face, the visionary CEO, brilliant and charismatic. I was the quiet force behind the scenes, the CTO, building the infrastructure, managing the chaos, ensuring the rocket stayed on course. Our roles diverged naturally, but the partnership felt immutable. We got married in a whirlwind, a celebration that felt like a punctuation mark on everything we had built together. Our lives were so intertwined with the company's life, it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. We bought a house, built a life that felt solid, cushioned by success, warmed by a love that had been forged in the trenches of shared struggle. Or so I thought. The change in him was subtle at first, a slow, almost imperceptible shift. It started small. Less consultation, more declaration. Decisions made behind closed doors that impacted my teams. A new impatience with my questions, my concerns. He dismissed them as me being too cautious, not seeing the big picture. His ambition, once our shared fuel, began to feel like a separate entity, a hungry beast he fed in secret. Dinners became quieter. The shared laughter was replaced by the clinking of forks and the distant hum of the city. He was still charming, still John, but a colder version, polished and distant, his eyes often elsewhere, calculating. Then came the day. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, not at first. It was a Tuesday evening. We were home, the house quiet after a long day. He came into the living room, holding a thick folder. He smiled, that easy, confident smile that used to melt me. He said it was a routine restructuring document, something the lawyers recommended for tax efficiency and streamlining ownership as we prepared for a potential IPO. He said it was complex, standard stuff, nothing for me to worry my pretty head about. Just sign here, and here, and here. He even had post-it notes marking the signature lines. He sat beside me on the sofa, the folder open on the coffee table. The air felt heavy, warm and still, yet charged with a strange tension I couldn't name. He smelled faintly of his expensive cologne, and something else like stale ambition, maybe. He talked quickly, his voice smooth, explaining clauses I didn't understand, using terms I'd never heard in all our years building the company. My head swam. It looked official, dense with legal jargon. The company logo was on every page. It felt real. Yet a tiny voice, deep inside, screamed. It was the same intuition that had warned me about faulty code, about a shaky market strategy. This felt wrong. I picked up a page, my fingers tracing the dense blocks of text. It was overwhelming. John, I started, it's a lot. Can I have our legal team look at this? Or at least read it properly? His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened just a fraction. Honey, it's just standard boilerplate. Our lawyers drafted it. They're busy with the IPO prep. It's all above board. Just a formality. He reached across and gently, but firmly, guided my hand towards the first signature line, holding out the pen. Come on, just sign it. Let's not make a big deal out of this. I've had a long day. The pressure was subtle but relentless. It wasn't a threat, not overtly. It was the pressure of a husband asking his wife to trust him, the implied accusation that questioning him was a lack of faith in us, in him. My mind raced. Why the hurry? Why couldn't our own legal team explain it? Why did he need me to sign it now? My hand trembled slightly as I took the pen. This was the man I loved, the man I'd built everything with. He wouldn't hurt me. He couldn't. That little voice, however, was screaming louder now. But the pressure of the moment, the desire not to create conflict, not to question the man I'd intertwined my life with, won. I signed. My name felt foreign on the page, each stroke a tiny surrender I didn't understand. He smiled again, genuinely this time, relieved. He closed the folder, a soft thud in the quiet room. See? Easy. Now, what's for dinner? The days that followed were a blur of unease. The feeling of having signed something I didn't understand gnawed at me. He acted normal, perhaps even a little more relaxed. But things felt different at work. Small things. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Decisions made about my department without my input. When I asked John about them, he was dismissive. Just streamlining, he'd say. Handling things so you can focus on the tech. It sounded reasonable, yet it felt like a door slowly closing in my face. I tried to read the contract I'd signed, the one he'd left carelessly on his desk. It was like trying to decipher a foreign language. Paragraphs referencing trusts, classes of shares I didn't own, clauses about vesting schedules that made no sense in the context of my existing ownership. My confusion deepened into suspicion. This wasn't just tax paperwork. This was something else. I felt isolated.
Who could I talk to?
Our friends were mutual friends, many connected to the company.
Our families adored John.
Questioning him felt like heresy. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing day. The easy camaraderie between us at work evaporated. I felt like an outsider looking in on my own life, my own company. One afternoon, feeling desperate, I called an old friend from law school, Sarah. She wasn't in corporate law, but maybe she could recommend someone or just listen. I described the situation vaguely, the complex document, the pressure to sign, my unease. Sarah listened patiently. When I finished, there was a pause.
That sounds concerning, she said carefully.
Especially the part about not letting your own company lawyers review it with you. Can you get me a copy? Getting a copy felt like a clandestine operation in my own home. I waited until John was out, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I found the folder where he'd left it, tucked away in his office. I scanned the document quickly, sending it to Sarah. The act itself felt like a betrayal, yet the alternative felt like self-destruction. Sarah called me the next day.
Her voice was grave.
"This is not a standard restructuring document," she said. "Not even close.
It's
essentially a document that transfers your ownership stake and your control in the company to John over a specified period, citing nebulous performance clauses. It makes your existing ownership subordinate to this new agreement. It's designed to look legitimate, but its purpose is to legally strip you of your assets and influence without you fully realizing it until it's too late." The world tilted. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. My own husband, the man who had slept beside me for years, who knew my dreams, who had built this empire with me, was systematically trying to steal it all. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. This wasn't just about money or control. This was a complete annihilation of my identity, my work, my partnership, our history. The tax efficiency was a lie. This streamlining was code for cutting me out. Sarah explained the mechanics, the legal maneuvering. The document was crafted to appear as a mutually agreed-upon amendment to our partnership, but it was fundamentally predatory. My signature, obtained under duress, and without full disclosure of its true nature and implications, might still be legally binding, or at least incredibly difficult to fight. My blood ran cold. I had signed my own professional death warrant, handed him the weapon to dismantle my life. "Is there anything?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Is there any way?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. These kinds of contracts often rely on overriding previous agreements. Was there ever an original partnership agreement? Something signed when you first started the company. The forgotten document. The bedrock. The co-founders' agreement signed over pizza all those years ago. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden surge of adrenaline cutting through the despair. Yes, I breathed. Yes, there was. Arthur insisted on it.
It's
somewhere. In a safe. I think. Find it. Sarah's voice was sharp, urgent. Find that document. That is your bedrock. A subsequent contract, even a signed one, cannot always unilaterally invalidate a prior, foundational agreement, especially if the new one was signed under duress or misrepresentation, and fundamentally alters the terms established in the original. That original contract defines the fundamental nature of your partnership and ownership. This new one attempts to redefine it entirely, to your detriment. If the original is robust, it might supersede or at least severely challenge the validity of the new one, especially with proof of his deceptive behavior. Finding the original agreement became my sole focus. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was my lifeline. I searched the house frantically, but discreetly, poring over old boxes, rifling through dusty files in the attic. John noticed my searching, my distraction. He asked what I was doing. I mumbled something about looking for old photos, for sentimental reasons. He bought it or pretended to. The tension between us was a physical thing now, a suffocating blanket. We shared a house, a bed, but we were strangers, locked in an unseen battle. Days turned into a week. The safe. Where was the key? Where was the combination? I remembered putting important documents in there years ago. Old passports, birth certificates, that contract. Panic began to set in. Had he moved it? Had he anticipated this? The thought was a cold, hard knot in my gut. Then, sifting through a box of old financial records, buried beneath stacks of tax returns and utility bills, I found a small, tarnished metal box. Inside, among dried-up pens and rubber bands, was a tiny key. The safe was hidden behind a painting in his study. My hands shook as I fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a quiet click. Inside, tucked neatly, was the worn leather-bound folder. The co-founders' agreement. My breath hitched. It felt heavier than paper and ink. It felt like vindication, like strength. I pulled it out, carried it to the kitchen table, spreading the pages under the weak overhead light. The language was still dense, but familiar names leaped out. Arthur, the lawyer's firm, our names, signed side by side. Clause after clause detailing equal partnership, mutual consent required for major structural changes, clear terms for dissolution based on a 50-50th split or a fair market value buyout agreed upon by both parties. This was it. This was the truth, written years before the lies began. This was my bedrock. Holding the document, a cold calm settled over me. The fear didn't vanish, but it was overlaid by a steel determination. I wasn't the confused, cornered wife anymore. I was the co-founder who had helped build an empire, and someone was trying to steal it. I contacted Sarah again, and this time, she connected me with a formidable corporate litigator. Let's call her Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was everything John's lawyer was not: sharp, ethical, with a reputation for fighting for justice, not just victory. I showed her both documents. The fake contract, the real one. I explained the circumstances of the signing, the pressure, his deception, the pattern of being frozen out. Eleanor read everything carefully, her face unreadable. When she finished, she looked at me, her gaze steady. "He made a fundamental mistake," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He assumed the old agreement was irrelevant or that this new one would simply override it without challenge. But the original agreement is a strong, well-drafted foundation for your partnership. This new contract attempts to redefine that foundation based on what appears to be misrepresentation and potentially duress. We can argue that this new contract is invalid, or at the very least, subordinate to the original terms which guarantee your equal standing." The plan formed. It wouldn't be easy. It would be public, painful, and messy. Suing my husband. The thought itself felt surreal, a plotline from a movie, not my life. But what choice did I have? Let him take everything? Let him erase me? The bitterness of his betrayal was a toxic taste in my mouth. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, my contribution, everything he tried to make me believe was worthless or never truly mine. Preparing for the legal battle was draining. Gathering evidence of his manipulative behavior, detailing the circumstances of the signing, proving the existence and validity of the original agreement. I moved out of the house. Living under the same roof became unbearable, the silence between us a screaming accusation. He tried to talk to me, to downplay everything, to call my concerns crazy. He still didn't know I had the original contract, or that I knew the true nature of the fake one. He was confident I was operating from a position of weakness, that my only leverage was our shared history, which he was busy dismantling anyway. His condescension fueled my resolve. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of meetings with Eleanor, reviewing documents, anticipating his arguments. Sleep was elusive, replaced by a constant low hum of anxiety and a burning core of righteous anger. I saw him across courtrooms during preliminary motions. He looked confident, surrounded by his legal team. He still had that same smug look, the look of a man who thought he held all the cards. He had no idea I had the ace. The day of the hearing arrived. I walked into the courtroom, the worn leather folder containing the original agreement clutched in my hand. The room was formal, imposing. The judge sat elevated, a figure of impartial authority. His lawyers were lined up, their files stacked neatly. And then I saw him, John, sitting across the aisle, looking every bit the successful, wronged businessman. He glanced at me, a brief, cold look. My heart hammered against my ribs. His lawyer began, presenting the case with practiced ease. They laid out the narrative John wanted the court to believe: a necessary corporate restructuring, a partner who was no longer contributing equally, a valid contract signed willingly. They referenced the fake contract, exhibit it multiple times, holding it up, pointing to my signature as proof of my agreement. His lawyer painted a picture of a seamless transition, unfortunately challenged by a disgruntled spouse using the divorce proceedings to gain leverage in the business. It was a clean, logical story, built entirely on a lie. John watched from his seat, nodding occasionally, looking calm, in control. He thought the fake contract was unassailable, the only relevant document. He had erased the past, the original partnership, the mutual struggle, in his mind. He had replaced it with a narrative of his sole creation, a narrative where I was merely an obstacle to be legally removed. Then it was our turn. Eleanor rose, her presence commanding. She didn't start by attacking the fake contract. She started with the history. She spoke of the garage, the early days, the shared vision, the equal contributions. She spoke of the formation of the partnership, the founding principles, the investment that required a robust legal framework. And then she introduced Exhibit B, the original co-founders agreement. She walked to the judge's bench and placed the worn leather folder next to the pristine copy of the fake contract. She spoke clearly, methodically. Your Honor, this document, signed by both parties on date years ago, is the foundational agreement governing the partnership that built this company. It establishes equal ownership and requires mutual consent for any fundamental changes to the structure and control of the entity. She paused, letting the weight of the document settle. She then referenced specific clauses from the original agreement, clauses about partnership dissolution, about equitable distribution, about the requirements for amending the agreement itself, requirements the fake contract clearly did not meet. Then she turned her attention to Exhibit A, the fake contract. She didn't dispute my signature. Instead, she highlighted the circumstances under which it was obtained, the pressure, the lack of independent counsel review, the deliberate misrepresentation of its true nature as a tax document. She argued that Exhibit A was not a valid amendment to the original agreement, but a predatory attempt to circumvent and violate the fundamental terms established in Exhibit B. As Eleanor spoke, I watched John across the aisle. His confident posture had stiffened. The smug look was gone, replaced by confusion, then a dawning horror. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer. His lawyer, who moments ago had seemed so confident, now looked flustered, quickly leafing through their own files, clearly unprepared for the existence, or perhaps the presentation, of the original agreement. Eleanor continued, building her case, each sentence a nail in the coffin of his scheme. She presented emails, which I had carefully preserved, notes, even testimony from Arthur's old lawyer confirming the nature and intent of the original agreement. She demonstrated how the terms of the fake contract directly contradicted and attempted to invalidate the core principles of the real one, without adhering to the amendment procedures laid out in the real one. She concluded by stating that based on the terms of the original, valid co-founders agreement, Exhibit B, his attempt to seize control via the fraudulent contract, Exhibit A, was null and void. She outlined our request, that the original agreement be upheld, affirming my equal ownership and calling for a dissolution of the partnership based on its equitable terms, terms that were far more favorable to me than anything in the fake contract. The courtroom was silent again, a heavy, charged silence. The judge was looking from the original contract to the fake one, listening intently. John's lawyer stood up, trying to object, to argue that the old contract was superseded, irrelevant after the marriage, after subsequent corporate filings. But Eleanor countered calmly, citing case law, explaining why a foundational partnership agreement holds significant weight, especially when a subsequent document appears fraudulent in its intent and execution. Then John made a sound, a choked gasp. Everyone turned. He was clutching his chest. His face had gone ashen, the color draining away rapidly. His eyes were wide with something I couldn't quite read, not just shock, but something deeper, a profound, visceral impact. His lawyer rushed to his side. The smug, confident facade he'd worn for months shattered in an instant. The realization of his complete, utter failure, the public dismantling of his carefully constructed lie, the knowledge that his greed had not only cost him his marriage, but now potentially the very empire he sought to control alone, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He tried to speak, a jumble of words that made no sense. He began to shake, trembling uncontrollably. Then, Slowly at first, then collapsing with terrifying speed. He crumpled in his chair, his eyes rolling back. A commotion erupted. His lawyers were calling for help, courtroom staff rushing forward. He had physically collapsed, right there in the courtroom, in the middle of the hearing. My eyes were fixed on him, a strange mix of shock, pity, and a cold, hard absence of feeling warring within me. This wasn't the dramatic, satisfying moment of victory I might have imagined. It was messy, frightening, and profoundly sad. The man I had loved, my partner, my husband, reduced to this, not by my actions, but by the weight of his own deceit crashing down upon him. The hearing was immediately adjourned. Paramedics were called. I watched from my side of the aisle, numb. The feeling wasn't triumph.
It was
Empty. The years of love, trust, and shared dreams lay in ruins around us, and in the middle of it all, he was being attended to by strangers, a symbol of a spectacular self-inflicted defeat. He was taken away in an ambulance. News spread quickly. The court proceedings were halted indefinitely while his health was assessed. The aftermath was quiet, strangely anticlimactic after the courtroom drama. The legal fight essentially ended there for a time. His lawyers, faced with the undeniable evidence of the original contract and the circumstances surrounding the fake one, and with their client incapacitated, were in a weak position. The judge's inclination was clear. The original agreement held sway. The company entered a period of limbo. With John out of the picture, the board, guided by Eleanor and the clear terms of the original agreement, began the process of restructuring based on the bedrock, not the lie. My position as co-founder with equal ownership was affirmed. The fake contract became exhibit not of his victory, but of his attempted fraud. There was no triumphant return to the CEO's office for me. The taste of victory was too bitter, too intertwined with the sorrow of betrayal and destruction. The company, our shared dream, felt tainted. How could I lead a company whose foundation had been shaken by such deceit from within? I made a decision. Based on the terms of the original co-founders' agreement, which allowed for a buyout upon dissolution of the partnership under specific conditions, I negotiated a separation. It wasn't a full 50-50 split immediately, but a fair, structured buyout of my shares over time, acknowledging my equal founding contribution and stake. It gave me financial security beyond anything I would have had under his fake contract, and it gave me freedom. The company continued without either of us at the helm, guided by a new leadership team brought in by the board. It felt like letting go of a child, watching it walk away into the world without its original parents. John recovered physically, but the collapse, the public humiliation, the legal defeat, they seemed to have broken something in him that couldn't be fixed. We divorced quietly. There was nothing left to fight over, the major assets settled by the upholding of the original agreement. We barely spoke. What was there to say? I used the resources from the buyout to start something new. Something entirely mine, built from the ground up, not on shared dreams that could curdle into betrayal, but on a solid foundation of self-reliance and lessons learned the hardest way possible. Sometimes, I see articles about the old company still thriving. Sometimes, I hear rumors about John living a quieter life somewhere. The man I built an empire with, the man who tried to steal it all with a piece of paper. The scar of the betrayal remains. It's a cold reminder that the people closest to you are capable of the deepest wounds. But I also carry the knowledge that I didn't break. I didn't let him erase me. I found the bedrock, the truth hidden beneath the lies, and I used it to stand firm. Winning wasn't about destroying him. It was about rebuilding myself on the ruins of what he tried to tear down. It was about proving that paper trails built on trust and truth are more powerful than deceit. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.